All right, the recording has begun. My name is Will Hull, and I am the facilitator for this hearing. This will actually be Unit 2 for Nebraska for Division C for the We the People National Finals. In a moment, I'll have the judges introduce themselves, followed by the students, and then we'll begin the hearing. Students will deliver a 4-minute prepared statement, followed by 8 minutes of judge follow-up questions. My microphone will be muted during the hearing. However, I will be holding up the 1 minute and the time signs so that you're aware of those periods of the hearing. I also suggest that for you, the students, up in the very top right-hand corner, there's a view icon of your Zoom window. Change that to a gallery view if you haven't done so already, so you can see myself and the time. And at the conclusion of the hearing, the judges will provide brief feedback and then we will conclude. At this time, I'll go ahead and pass the microphone over to the judges where they can introduce themselves.
All right, welcome Nebraska and congratulations for being here. I am Nick Drummond. I'm an assistant professor of political science at Black Hills State University in South Dakota.
Hello, welcome and congratulations. My name is Tim Igo. I am a lawyer, writer, and magazine editor in Phoenix, Arizona, and I work at the State Bar of Arizona.
Hello, my name is Chuck Dunlap, and I'm president and CEO of the Indiana Bar Foundation in Indianapolis, Indiana, and it's good to see you today.
Hello, my name is Kenneth O.
My name is McKellen Clark.
And my name is Kai Waddell.
All right, well, great to meet all of you. We're going to start things off with the question, and then the floor will be yours. We are doing Unit 2, Question 2, and I will read the question with the prompts. One founder claimed that representatives should refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country. Do you agree or disagree with this claim? What alternative systems of representation were considered by the founders? What alternative systems of representation, if any, should be considered in the 21st century? You may begin.
We disagree with the claim made in Federalist 10 that argues that elected representatives in a representative democracy should follow the interests of their constituents. Because while this founder may have believed that the elected best discern the, quote, true interests of the country, quote, in reality, this system has allowed for the creation of an elite democracy where the representatives in power don't always have the best interests of the people at heart. Furthermore, the use of lobbying and the desire to cling to political power has created a pluralist system emboldening the same fighting factions that Federalist 10 warned about.
The idea that representatives know what is best for their constituents and will amplify their voices is not only sometimes elitist, but at times entirely incorrect. For instance, in 2019, despite overwhelming bipartisan support for measures to implement background checks on firearm purchases, the House legislation to implement said measures was caught in legislative limbo as former Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell continually blocked said legislation from entering the Senate floor. Thus, despite what the public was calling for, congressional leaders refused to refine and enlarge the public views, opting instead to implement measures that benefit them rather than the people's interests. Furthermore, lobbying, which has been upheld by the First Amendment in the court case Citizens United v. FEC, as it is seen as an expression of political viewpoints and part of the democratic participation, has led to a greater disconnect between the policy desires of citizens and the actions of legislators. This is something foreshadowed in Brutus I, which warns that an elitist system will allow elites to make decisions based on their own best interest rather than that of their constituents. Revisiting the McConnell case, following increased support for gun laws, the NRA spent $1.6 million lobbying Congress against passing gun reforms within the first half of 2019 alone, and McConnell himself is reported to have received over $1.2 million throughout his career. We can therefore observe that lobbying and the plethora of clashing interest groups have created the chaotic, pluralist political climate that Federalist 10 warned against.
There are several alternative systems of representation considered by the founders. While some argue for the constitutional republic system the country adopted, others, like the anti-federalists, were much more worried about the dangers of said system. In Brutus I, anti-federalist authors argued that the creation of a constitution would nullify state powers and leave the federal government with too much power, opting instead to stick to the Articles of Confederation. Anti-federalists expressed their fears by pointing to the necessary and proper clause in Article 1, Section 8, which allows Congress to pass any laws to help it achieve its constitutional duty. Anti-federalists were also concerned with the supremacy clause in Article 6, which explicitly placed federal power over state power. We saw this extension of this supremacy later on the landmark case McCulloch versus Maryland, where it's prevented Maryland from taxing the national bank as a result of federal power superseding state power, as well as in Gibbons v. Ogden, in which Congress was able to invoke the use of Commerce Clause and declare that a national license applied over a state license.
An alternative system of representation that should be considered in our modern era is proportional representation through a single transferable vote electorate system and multi-member districts. The former already utilized in many parliamentary systems. The former explains that divisions in an electorate are proportionally reflected in the elected body. The essence of this system is that all votes contribute to the result rather than a simple majority under the plurality voting system that is used in the United States. This representation would be achieved through the single transferable vote electorate system, where voters rank individual candidates and vote for candidates who are eliminated throughout the count that would otherwise be wasted are transferred to other candidates in order of preferences. Conversely, voters indicate support for only one candidate in the first past the post voting system used in the United States. The former voting system enables voters to vote across party lines in order to choose the most preferred of a party's candidates and vote for independent candidates, knowing that if the candidate is not elected, their vote will likely not be wasted. The voting system will be successfully implemented through the incorporation of multi-member districts, where more than one member is elected to represent an electorate at a single election. The biggest advantage to proportional representation over pluralism is that gerrymandering or redistricting that intentionally benefits a certain political party or interest is effectively eliminated. Within George Washington's farewell address, Washington warns of sectionalism and split parties. When our politics are based solely on the manipulation of party lines, it unnecessarily exacerbates the political polarization within our country. Having proportional representation can bring back the essence of our nation, one of unity and compromise.
All right, thank you so much. At this point, we will now do Q&A, and I will turn things over to my colleague, Tim.
Thank you very much. That was a robust presentation. I appreciate that. Let me begin with something that you touched on, proportional representation. And so I believe I understand that, but I'm going to begin with something broader, which is the House of Representatives currently, and as set up by the founders, simply too small to effectively represent the views and interests of the American people, and whether those views can be represented in a different way?
Yeah, so you're correct that the House of Representatives does incorporate proportional representation. However, I would argue that at this time it does reflect the people's views to a certain extent, but I do believe through multi-member districting and possibly a little bit of change as well in the House of Representatives to account for possibly more members, more voices can be heard. Because, for example, in states with a larger population, in states with larger populations, there simply comes a point where more representatives won't necessarily equate to more voices being heard.
One thing I would also state is that in many rural states, the limitation on the number of number of representatives in that state causes like a severe divide between who the representative is supposed to represent. For example, in Nebraska, we only have 3 representatives for our entire state, but those representatives cover urban areas like the capital of Lincoln, but also severely rural areas like up in northern Nebraska, which are entirely different electorates who have entirely different needs. So increasing the amount of representatives in the House of Representatives would allow them to be more local and specialized towards the needs of their specific district rather than broad regions like in some smaller populated states.
Additionally, having a few more members possibly in states such as Nebraska would incorporate more voices being heard, just because we do have a quite significant libertarian base in the state, as well as Republican and Democrat. Currently, I believe all 3 of our representatives are Republican, and therefore Democratic voices in Nebraska and libertarian voices are not currently being heard. So therefore, a change, whether it be the number of representatives in the state or otherwise, would better help more people be represented.
And the most important thing isn't necessarily about how like people are represented, but rather the motives of the people within that are representing them, right? So when we need the state representatives that for each of these states to focus more on like the needs of the state instead of like what a party really votes for, because that's one thing that has really split our country apart, which is like voting upon party lines, because not every single Democratic state has like the same needs, and not every Republican state has the same needs. So when we focus more on the state's needs and the needs of the people and the voices of the people, it better fits the country and the system of government that we have.
I'm going to follow up on one thing. So I appreciate that. I was struck by your concern that people feel like they don't want to waste their vote, and so your approach would be they need not do that. Are there other representative democracies around the world that have larger houses or larger legislative bodies and that therefore maybe could represent a Green Party could be a real party instead of a fringe party, or there could be a Black Lives Matter party, or there could be any number of things.
I'm sorry, so could you just reiterate your specific question about that? My
Certainly.
apologies.
So would your proposal allow those what currently are fringe parties to participate more fully in our democracy?
Yes, I do believe so. Especially because with I think that incorporating, for example, proportional representation, possibly through the single transferable voting system, will kind of decrease the amount of voting strategy that is used, and it will kind of allow people, it will incentivize more people to vote for the candidate that they think whose views they align most with, rather than the person who think that they're mostly, my apologies, rather than the person they think is going to win the most. So for example, as an example from the recent, I guess, 2020 election, you could say, more broadly speaking, however, many people, at least in the Democratic primary, voted for Joe Biden instead of Bernie Sanders, just because his ideas were seen as being in the fringe, sort of in the mainstream political view, and therefore a lot of perhaps Democratic socialists or social democrats voted for Joe Biden, a more moderate candidate, because they knew that he would win being a moderate candidate over Bernie Sanders.
Thank you very much.
And one thing I kind of want to add on to that is that when we talk about fringe voices, our current system kind of only allows like a binary choice and maybe like a third choice, but the third party usually doesn't win. And that is not what like the people of our country are. We are not like a binary set of people, because we are not just, like sorted into two groups, because we all have our own different backgrounds, we all have our own different identities and our own different ideologies. And by adding a sort of like ranked choice, single transferable vote system, we can express these voices better, as there are more choices for people to perhaps fall under.
Thank you. I wanted to steer us a little bit in the direction of, generally speaking, the majority sort of rule as far as the policy outcomes in our system. How do you address that with the idea of tyranny of the majority? Is that something that are there checks built in to representation into the idea of protecting against tyranny of the majority in our current system, or should there be additional safeguards?
I think in many ways there are some checks against the idea of the tyranny of the majority. Number one, the Bill of Rights protects against many of the things that tyranny of the majority could cause. So say that the majority would like to take away certain minority civil rights, then those sorts of things can be protected by things like the Bill of Rights. But most importantly, I think the Supreme Court is the main mechanism by which these sort of case-by-case bases are analyzed for minorities and different groups who maybe aren't as represented in the political system. And so as a result, the Supreme Court will say, this is how it should apply broadly. This is how it should apply to this minority group, so that they aren't oppressed in the way that they're currently being oppressed right now.
Let's just take it in a new direction here, back to Madison, because much of what your thesis was and is rejecting Madison. So let me give you Madison's response, and I want to hear your response to it. Your thesis is that this system we have leads to elitism. Right? Elites are ruling, wielding power, so forth. Madison would argue, well, how did those individuals acquire power? The people elected them. Back then through the House of Representatives, but now through both the Senate and the House. So how would you respond to that? Isn't that the fault then that the people are electing these elites?
I think in many ways, it's difficult to sort of categorize them as entirely based on the people's certain vote. Like we say, there's many flaws with the current system that cause it not necessarily to be the people wanting that certain politician, but them either not wanting a different politician or just sort of being complacent with the person who is there. For example, many people in Nebraska would only vote for our Republican representative because they, number one, believe that he's the person who's already there, the incumbency bias that already exists, but also because they don't like the other person. So in many ways, the elitism can kind of grow through things like incumbency bias, but also because you're not voting for the person you want, you're voting for the person you want the least, or you don't like the least.
And again, that's kind of where the single transferable vote comes in hand, is that, just as my colleague Kai mentioned, it incentivizes, like Kai mentioned, people to vote for the person who they want rather than the person who they think is going to win the most.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was well done. Now is the time when we'll give you some constructive feedback. I'll lead off and say I enjoyed much of what you said. The delivery was maybe a little rapid, and I think that detracts from your overall performance. You know what you want to say, you say it well, but you came out just firing so quickly that it doesn't project the strength and conviction and confidence that I think it should. But when I hear you speak, I know you're confident. I know you know this stuff. So I would encourage you to slow down a little bit, maybe even whittle down some of your answers if you can, just so you don't have to rapid fire it. And I think the audience will appreciate that more. And again, I don't want this to make it seem like what you said was wrong in any way. Just slow down a little bit, and I think you'll be more effective that way. I'll let my colleagues now jump in.
Yeah, I just have a couple things. First, it's always challenging with this format because you have so much to say and a lot to say in a short period of time. But it is effective, to get that across. This last question, I thought, who is electing these people, and how are they elite if the people are electing them? And one of the ideas, first of all, who's voting, the role of money. All of these things play a role in who is actually sitting in those offices. And you talk about the incumbency and the power that has, which is quite a bit, name recognition, et cetera. And I thought you had I appreciated that you really sort of maybe triple down on the idea of, this proportional representation and the idea of changing the system. And that was, I appreciated that. You didn't just say, what was wrong. You said, here's a solution, and here's why we think this is a solution. And I thought that was particularly impressive and a powerful statement that you were able to back that up so well. Well done.
I'd agree. Will, can we have another hour? I'd like to talk to these guys more about this because this is fascinating. This was very, very well done. I appreciate this. I like Judge Drummond said, and Judge Dunlap, the speed was something else. But ultimately it worked for me. It made me bring my A game to listen and pay attention. It could be off-putting to some. I thought for a second, is this the New York team? What's going on here? So this is very, very funny. So a few things in terms of responding to the critique, which I think was a good one, which is, but didn't voters put these people in? So aren't voters, should they just educate themselves better or whatever? I think maybe subtly, without specifically saying it, you suggested your answer to that, which is, we're all trapped in a broken system. So voters are putting these people in, and voters are us, not just them, but us. We're putting these people in, but the choices we have are problematic because of the structures that are in place. So I think that came across. I thought your citations were on point and helpful. Your thesis was strong and strongly held and carried all the way through. I thought you had good thinking and good writing. So that helped very much. And I think ultimately, I have to thank you for this. It helps me come out of today thinking differently about things, because what I took from you was that, when I think of what we learned from intersectionality in studies in other areas, not just in government, is that our current system that demands binary choices may be outdated. And the challenges we face are not binary challenges. So our choices shouldn't be binary either. So I appreciate your broad thinking about this and your thoughtfulness. Very well done.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this hearing. Students, if you want to say thanks, feel free.
Thank you very much for judging.
Yeah, thank you all so much. We really appreciate it.
Nice job, Nebraska.
Great job.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll go ahead